G'day fans and welcome to another exciting episode of Sci-Fi Zone, the show where we discuss science fiction movies and TV shows and stuffs. But tonight we're talking about books. How good is that? And for that reason, I have brought along the queen of book readers, and that has got to be Miss Claire. How are you going tonight, Miss Claire?
I'm pretty good. I don't know about queen of book readers. I'm sure there are people out there who read more than I do, but I do love a good book.
Yeah, but there are people who read books, but there are cool people who read books, and you are someone who definitely comes into the category of a cool person who reads a book. So if I was on a train, like nobody's reading books anymore on trains, they're all on iPhones and whatever else. But if you're sitting there reading a book, and I was on an iPhone, I'd be looking at you going, you know what? She's pretty cool, that lady over there. So there you go. In fact, now this one, here we go. For me and Goddess Claire, how's that for a promotion from last week, eh? Oh my goodness.
Hi, Christy.
I'll tell you what, how good is that? Absolutely awesome. No, seriously though, Claire, how is it? Hang on. Have you eaten any good books lately? Exactly right. I love it. So good old Aaron's joining us, probably from his store, in fact. So how are you, Miss Claire? How are you doing this evening on this nice warm, was it Monday evening?
Yeah, it's been a lovely day all day. So yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah, looking forward to this discussion. It's going to be an interesting one.
Excellento, good stuff. All right, so there you go, and there we go. Thomas said hello, and Joe also says hi as well, which is a very, very, very groovy. All right, so again, we've only got 1 hour to go to spare, so we're just going to go straight into it. So, Claire, what science fiction-y sort of things have you done this week, which is just like really, really groovy?
Well, the science fiction-y thing that caught my interest the most this week is a movie that's about to come out called Don't Look Up. It's science fiction in that there's a comet coming towards Earth, and it's probably going to destroy us. So not massively science fiction, but science fiction-y enough. But the difference with this story is basically no one listens. They tell all the authorities, they talk to all the right people, they explain what's going to happen, and people are just like, oh, yeah, it'll be right. No, don't worry about it. So they go on like a media tour trying to get people to listen, and kind of doesn't happen. So it's going to be a black comedy, and I think black comedy and sci-fi is an interesting combination. But I'm quite keen to see what this is like. I saw shorts for it, and it looked like it would be quite funny, but also quite I don't know, eye-opening, perhaps get us thinking a little bit about what's happening in the world, because that's what's happening in the world. Like, it's not a comet, it's climate change, but everyone's just kind of going, it'll be right. So I think it's going to be an interesting movie.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of idea, isn't it? Where you use, and because we had even as far back as 2012, if you remember the movie 2012, and even back then they were talking about climate change and the Earth's changing, and I think it was also the one where New York freezes over and all the snow comes in and whatever else. And you're right, a lot of people just go, oh, it's all great, it's all fictitious and whatever else. But underneath that, there's actually an element of truth. And when movies, and I agree with you, the whole black comedy thing, and go, yeah, have a bit of a laugh, it's all well and good, but there's actually a message just buried just below the surface, and you go, oh, hang on, this is actually quite serious. So, but yeah, I looked it up myself, and I see it's a bit of one of those all-star cast sort of scenarios. So every man and his woofers turned up for this, and for that reason, a lot of people probably got on board because they thought, yeah, this has actually got a message to it, and we want to be a part of that, which is very, very cool. So.
Yeah, and I think it'll be good to see Leonardo DiCaprio back on the screen. I quite like him. I think he's one of those guys that's gotten a bit older, gotten better with age. Tom Cruise was another one of those. Not a huge fan when he was younger, but
remember, it's not Leo.
Leo.
Sorry, go on. What? Sorry, I missed the last bit.
It's Leo.
Leo. Oh, be still my beating heart. You're exactly right. Now, here's one for you. You're going to love this one, right? Christy is actually now, she says, we're lucky to have it tonight because the new Outlander book was released today, 5 chapters in. Have you read that or know about that one at all?
I haven't read it, but I've seen the TV series and I love it. I'm very excited for that.
Very, very cool. It's very funny because we're talking about adaptations tonight, ironically, from book to screen. So that's actually, I like that you said, I've read the book, but I've seen the TV series. I love it. And Christy will read the book and go, the book is way better. But anyway, we'll cover that base a little bit later on, which is very, very cool.
Yeah.
For myself, I've only got a couple of things that I wanted to sort of bring up. And of course, one of the ones is like the massive what do you call it, furor that's occurred in the past few days, and it's just got like turned the world completely on its absolute head, is the fact that poor old Star Trek Discovery got the arse of Netflix and is now bugging off the Paramount Plus, but it's not coming up to Australia till next year. And the first episode, I think, may have actually occurred like 3 days ago. So what do you reckon of that, Claire? Isn't that a bit of a kick in the teeth for poor old Star Trek fans in this country?
It is. It's very disappointing, and it's not just us. I think it's the UK as well, and a few other places around the world. But like, I mean, they can, in a way, they can do what they want with it because it's theirs. But to pull it at the last minute and just have fans sitting there like hating, what the hell? And of course, in today's world, there are spoilers everywhere. Like the people who have seen it want to talk about it, and they're out there talking about it. And so it's actually going to be quite difficult to avoid spoilers for the next, how long is it going to be? Months? A couple of months at least. So pretty disappointed.
It comes across as like a Netflix executive and a Paramount executive had a bit of a barney over lunch, and the Netflix executive said, well, I'm going to take my bat and ball and go home, and you can just get stuffed. And the Paramount person has just said, fine, I'll grab my Star Trek Discovery and I'm going out the door over here. So blow it out your ass. And it's the poor old fans. It's just, absolutely bullshit, isn't it? So, and I agree with you. If it happened months ago, people could have dealt with it, but not like a day or two before it was due to be released. It's like far out. Yeah. One thing I did like, I don't like what they've done, right? That's clearly just bullshit. But it does show that there's enough Discovery fans out there to make a bit of a song and dance about the fact that the show's not going to be around. Had the show been going really poorly, people would have said, oh, we don't really give a shit. But there's obviously a big fan base for it. And so it does go to show that it's got a bit of a following. Yeah, sorry. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been all over my Twitter and Facebook feed the last couple of days. So, and people really quite angry and upset about it. I think Sully's saying it's going to be 6 months if you're not in North America.
I think something like that. So, that's just rubbish, isn't it? It's like the old VHS days with Next Generation. So it's absolutely crazy.
Post them over. So Floyd will get to watch it. Floyd will get to see it because he's in North America.
Is our number one American fan, and look at that, and he's 3 a.m. in the morning over in Floyd. But how devoted is Floyd? I've got to say, he's just such a cool dude. What can I say? But unbelievable. So there you go. Oh, yeah, good on you, Daniel. Yeah, tape the torrent sites again. And I agree with you. Those who and this will be like in the old days when people used to send videotapes from across the world. People will be downloading Discovery left, right, and center, and it's just like probably Netflix and Paramount have done themselves no favors whatsoever. But
well, that's the thing. I mean, but delaying it 6 months, that's what they've done. They've I mean, the articles are saying basically we're being forced to download it, to pirate it. Now, I won't do that. That's not me. But you can completely see that people will do that. They're going to want to watch it. They're not going to want to wait 6 months. What are you laughing at?
I saw this comment, and I had to really read it a couple of times. This is from Aaron, and Aaron has made a point of being a real smart ass on the show, right? Said, I like all the Trek, I like an STD VHS, no big deal. Who needs STDs? Freaking good on you. I was thinking, what the hell is he doing? I was like, I thought he was insulting Discovery, and then it turns out he's not. So there you go. I agree with you, Colin. Yeah, they're right. I mean, they have the rights to do it and all the rest of it. That's fair enough, but still, it could have been done and handled completely different. So, but anyway, it's just the way it goes. And well, yeah, you're right. We'll just have to see what happens when the time comes. But anyway, whatever. So there you go. Oh my goodness, there's a long message from Kevin. I have to read that in a second. So anyway, so here's what the other thing was sent to me just during the week, and this is ironic because it fits directly in what we're discussing tonight, right? Obviously, a lot of people out there with too much time on their hands create their own commercials and ads and things like that for products that don't exist. And this one was sent through to me, and I thought this is an absolute gag and a half. And it's the weirding way, or the weirding module from Dune, right? This is the 84 version of Dune where you have the weapon and you use sound to actually like arm it and fire it, right? And I just thought that was grouse. Weirding modules are just made by Alan. It's an Alan Smithy game. Oh, I love that. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. What do you reckon?
That's pretty cool. So is it just the design, or do they actually have a toy?
Oh, no, it doesn't exist. Yeah, exactly right. But the kid's got the nose plug up the thing, and he's just
very cool.
The
detail's amazing.
Yeah, it does look very, very cool. Yeah, you see destroying pyramids and all the rest of it. So, yeah, very, very groovy. So, Kevin has sent through a really long message regarding our next topic, which we're going to get to in a second. So, there you go. What? Here, chuk 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 sa. Yeah, right. Very
Okay.
good. Very good stuff. Anything else you want to bring up, Miss Claire, before we get on to our major topic
No,
for this
no.
evening?
Happy to move on. Happy to move on.
Good stuff. All right, so we're having a bit of a chat here about good old books from movies, and it's an interesting one because we've got two facets of the discussion tonight. One is to work out or look at films that have come from books and whether they've succeeded or not. And Claire's got a list of books that she's either read or going to read that she thinks should be made into movies, and we'll get to those a bit later on. So before we go, I'll put this up from Kevin. He obviously spent a bit of time writing this. So part of the problem movie adaptation of a favorite sci-fi book is that the reader has a personal, idealized vision of the story, and they're going to be disappointed whatever is on the screen. Look at the bun fights with Lord of the Rings and Dune. So just starting things off, Claire, because you read far more books than I do. Movie adaptations from the page to the screen. In your opinion, do they sort of work by and large or not?
Yeah, well, it's hard to sort of say by and large because the variety, the range of what works and what doesn't is huge. Some things really, really work well, and some things just don't work at all. And then there's a whole range in between. Um, I tend to be open-minded. I know one of what Kevin was saying about people sort of having this vision in their head of what it should look like, what the book tells you it looks like, what they've imagined in their head. I mean, I do that when I'm reading. Obviously, as I'm reading the story, I'm picturing how it goes in my head, how things look, all that kind of stuff. But for me, it's more about personalities and that kind of stuff. So I can live with it looking different from the way I expect. But if the personalities of the main characters aren't consistent with the book, then I struggle with it. I don't even mind changes to the stories. Quite often, I think they work. I think sometimes it's quite difficult to translate from the pages of a book onto a screen. It's a completely different medium. You consume it in a different way. You think about it in a different way. So obviously the presentation's got to be a little bit different. But I think a lot of them work really well, and I don't think being true to the book is necessarily the answer. One of the ones I was going to mention, I don't want to jump into it too soon, give you a chance to talk as well, but Total Recall is a really interesting one to talk about because there have been two very, very different adaptations of that book. And I saw the first one, the Arnold Schwarzenegger version, before I read the story, and loved it. Thought it was great. It was interesting. It was clever. It was fun. It was funny, but also serious. And interestingly, a little bit about climate change. That's a bit of a theme. But then I read the story and kind of, okay, it's very, very loosely based on it. And then the new version came out, and the look obviously is completely different. It's been updated. It's not sort of 80s style stuff. But the story was also very different and was actually a lot closer to the book. And I think that one worked really well as well. So for me, both of them worked just in different ways. So I tend to be pretty flexible about what I think works and what doesn't.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of scenario, isn't it? Because you get people, and I agree with what Kevin said as well. People read the books, they interpret everything their own way, the characters, the environments, the situations. And then, of course, the people making the film are going to do exactly the same thing. And, of course, their vision is not going to be the same as the person who read the book. Their vision, the visions don't correlate. And I guess that's always going to happen unless the book is really descriptive in about how it's saying this is how the environment looks or how it works. I mean, in some cases, like you mentioned, Dune's a desert planet. Well, that's pretty easy to get right. But if you've got a certain character who dresses a certain way or has a certain look or feel or whatever else, and if the filmmakers intentionally don't copy that, then clearly the book reader is going to be like pretty miffed. They go, well, hang on, it says here in black and white, it should be like this. But they may have a justified reason as to why they didn't follow that. But using just, I don't want to go into fantasy novels. That's a whole different thing. But I think one of the biggest one of the most ironic scenarios is that you had the Lord of the Rings trilogy that was like massively successful in terms of the money and the Academy Awards and all the rest of it. And yet people who were really devoted to the books didn't really like them because they said, well, hang on, you're missing all these, like Tom Bombadil and all these other characters have all just been taken out. But when you watch the movie or the movies, you go, well, you don't need those characters. It all just works as is. So I guess there'll always be that ongoing argument as to which is the better medium. And I guess if you're really invested in the novel, then your brain is thinking, well, I want it to be line by line on the screen. And of course, that just isn't going to happen. So, but yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah. I mean, I don't subscribe to it's got to be line by line exactly the same, because what's the point? I mean, then it's just another version of the book. And what I want is not another version of the book. What I want is a movie. It's a different way of telling the story. And that visual thing is interesting. For me, it's like I said, for me, it's more about the character. As long as the character is consistent with what happens in the story, and because the characters usually need to be a particular way for the story to work. And so if they're not, then the story can't work. The way they look, sometimes it's important, sometimes, but quite often it's not. So I'm not so wedded to that, to the visuals, I guess, as a lot of people are. Yeah.
So there's two things. First thing, and as you actually bring up a very good point, I'm going to touch on it in a second. So Angie's mentioned about Starship Troopers, work does turn talk about the sequels. The funny thing about Starship Troopers is that Paul Verhoeven, who made the film, didn't even read the book. He said the book was shit. Yeah. He said, this is crap. He just chucked it out and he said, I'll just make my own movie, right? So people who are devoted to, say, Starship Troopers, the Robert Heinlein version, may go, well, hang on, the film is nowhere near what the book is meant to be about. Yet Starship Troopers, as in the first movie, was great. And, of course, one of the things that we've discussed on this show before was Asimov's I, Robot, which is not even remotely close to the books, right? And now, as you've read the books and I haven't, so did you find the Will Smith version of I, Robot, the movie, to like be, mate, this is just freaking me out. Why didn't they just call it something else? Were you happy with it?
Well, it's a great movie. Like, I really like it as a movie. And I get why they did call it iRobot. There are definitely elements of it in there. There are elements of the story. But iRobot is a collection of stories. Like, the book is a collection of stories. It's not one story. So the movie isn't based on a particular story. It's a bit of a conglomeration of bits and pieces from a few of the stories. But I think it works really well. There are a couple of things in it that I wasn't sure about. In the book, Susan Calvin is a lot older, although in the book, in fact, she goes through the later part of her life. It spans quite a long period of time, and she's not beautiful. And so when this woman came on, who was this, gorgeous young thing, yes, she was a scientist and she had the attitude and all that kind of stuff, which was great. But I was a little bit taken aback when I discovered that she was supposed to be Susan Calvin, because that wasn't at all how she was portrayed in the book. But I still think it worked. She had the attitude, and for me, that was the biggest thing. And Will Smith really was very much like a younger version of the guy in the book. There's one scene that really rung true for me, where he's got a cup of coffee and he's putting sugar, spoonful after spoonful after spoonful after spoonful, in the cup. That's straight out of the book. Like, that's from the book. And little things like that were enough to hold it all together and to keep it consistent with the theme of the book and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I loved the movie. I thought it was great. It wasn't the same. It wasn't a story, but it was the story in a way. Yeah.
Very cool. Just getting very quickly back on Lord of the Rings. So Aaron has said that Christopher Tolkien actually loved the movies, and for the bulk of the human population, they all love the movies as well. So I guess it's only a small minority who said, no, we don't like them. Whether those people changed their minds as the years rolled on and the dust had settled and they go rewatch them, at a video party, 10 years later and go, oh, yeah, they're not as bad as I remember. Who knows? Because at the time, I mean, everything happens, while it's happening right now, there's a lot of unhappy people, whatever else. But as time goes on and the dust settles, I go, oh, yeah, maybe we can just reflect back and go, oh, okay, it was actually all pretty groovy. The question I wanted to ask you, is that because a lot of the films are being adapted from books, do you think it's a smart movie? And we'll use iRobot as an example, but you can use other ones, where someone who watches the movie first to then go and read the book, if the book is vastly different from the film. Do you reckon that's a good idea or not?
Look, I mean, I do that. I quite often do that. And I think it's Thomas made a comment about that hidden story, the being able to know what the characters are thinking, which doesn't always come across in a movie. So I think you can get a lot from a book if you read it after you've seen the movie. Yeah, there we go. Okay. It does, when you're reading, it does become pictures in your head and that kind of thing. And you do get that backstory. You do get the reasons behind why things happen. In a movie, I mean, sometimes you get it and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's a voiceover saying, when I was a child, this happened to me and therefore I'm going to do that kind of thing. Whereas in a book, you get more depth, I think. Yeah, so I think it depends on the book and it depends on the person. I think a lot of people would struggle with iRobot as a book because it's quite old, and a lot of what they talk about is outdated now. We already have better technology in a lot of ways, but you do get a lot of the thinking behind it, the what led to these events and things happening. Yeah.
That's a very good point, because it was, as we've discussed on previous episodes, War of the Worlds, there's effectively two different shows out at the same time with the same name. And even though the modern one is not even remotely close to the film, the BBC version, which was really tried to be, as far as I'm aware, true to the novelisation, at least, or the book, at least in the time period, the 1800s or whatever else. And you go, you know what, the book was obviously written at that time, therefore that's classed as a contemporary setting. But does that actually work for a modern day audience? And the answer is, for some people, yes, and for some people, no. Whereas if you take the story and you modernize it, like they did for the Tom Cruise version of War of the Worlds, still kept the three-legged tripods and they're destroying the cities and all this sort of business. It's effectively the same story, but one is for a modern audience in a modern setting, and the other one is try to keep the original look and feel based way back here. You could actually argue that even though they're trying to be true to the novel and fitting it into the correct environment, that's actually not the right way to go. It's actually it's going to be detrimental to the success of the story. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, potentially. I mean, a lot of people love the historical drama and that kind of stuff, so it'll work for a lot of people. But I think you have to tell the story to the audience you've got, and the audience we've got isn't people from the 1800s. It's people from this century, and we have different technology. We have things that were never even considered a possibility back then when it was written. So I'm a bit more of a fan of updating stories, I think. I do like a good historical drama. Christy mentioned Outlander. That's it's not movies, it's a TV show, but it has a mix of different historical backdrops. So that's and I really enjoy that. That's a really good one. But I think you've got to talk to the audience you've got, and if your audience is, people who were born this century, because that's quite often what we're talking about now. It feels so weird to say I was born in the 1900s. I think updating it is a good thing, and the technology that we've got to make the movies too is vastly different from what it was in the past. And the Total Recall is a good example of that. I mean, the Schwarzenegger version, it's a great, fun version. But you look at some of the special effects and that kind of stuff, and there was a limit to what they were able to do. And then the later version, they have an elevator that goes through the planet, and you get to kind of see how that works. I think, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be one of those things that, well, pretty much everything is one of those things that it'll work for some people and it won't for others.
One of the things I did like, I'm just getting back to War of the Worlds, as we said, they've got the two versions, and yet the stories in both of them are pretty much identical. The aliens have come down, they've got their tripods, they're destroying the shit out of everything, and yet they both get defeated by bacteria. And so you could almost argue, well, what's the point of watching the 1800s version when the 20th century version or the 21st century version It's exactly the same story. You just
Tells the
modernize
same
it, so you see
story.
more, modern cars and modern technology, modern dialogue, all that sort of thing. So long as the story hasn't changed, then I agree with you. Modernizing it is actually not a bad idea at all. Now, there's a good comment here from Bob. It's essential to read Philip K. Dick in order to understand any of the film adaptations. If I'm not mistaken, Philip K. Dick was very critical a lot of the film adaptations of his work. He was never the happiest camper. Some authors aren't. Some authors, no matter what you do in terms of putting their stuff on screen, they go, nah, not working for me. But have you, that's a very sort of interesting point. And you would have read some of the Philip K. Dick stuff, yes?
Yeah, I have. I don't know what his attitude would have been like. I don't know anything about that. But the thing about it's interesting. I think reading the stories is worth it in his case because, and again, it goes back to that depth. The sort of the deeper ideas and the meaning behind it, for the most part, doesn't come across easily in movies. You can see bits of it if you've already read the book and you know the story, but you miss a lot if you just watch the movie. I think I would agree with that, particularly in Dick's case. His stuff was amazing. His stuff was so I don't even know how to describe it, but yeah.
There's definitely an argument to suggest that adapting a book to the screen gets better results in terms of a pure story than writing directly for the screen, because when the book is written, the author's imagination just plows out into the pages, and then the filmmaker has to adapt it accordingly. But then while the book has been written, there's no restrictions, there's no limitations. Whereas if you're a filmmaker writing a script from day one, you go, all right, I need to have 450 million aliens
Am
in
I
this
going to be able
particular
to
scene.
do
How
it?
do I do that?
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
you're actually creating the problem before you found the solution, as opposed to someone else's just invented this thing, and then later on you go, you know what? That's awesome. How do we do what they're doing in the story?
How do we portray that on
think
screen?
that's probably why adapted works tend to work better. Yeah, in not all cases, but a lot of cases, yeah. Well, some of the most classic sci-fi movies are definitely based on books. Two questions here. It's very funny. Two people have asked exactly the same question. So the Viola asked about the Jeff Wayne musical version of War of the Worlds, and Gavin asked the same thing as well. Oh yeah, it's just a different medium. I mean, it was really, really good. It was obviously based on the original story in the 1800s, which ironically matches up with the BBC version of the show. And the music was good, and the story was good, and having I've forgotten the guy's name who did the narration. Elizabeth Taylor's husband, Richard Burton. That's it. Doing the narration.
Oh, right.
Fantastic. Yeah. So very, very cool. And Aaron has brought up an interesting point here about Stephen King hating, say, the Kubrick version of The Shining, and that comes back to that whole argument of authors disliking their films or the way the adaptations are actually created. So it seems to be a very, very common issue.
Kubrick completely missed the point of that story, in my view. And the adaptation that was mentioned, I think it was like a 6-part mini series, was brilliant. It was the movie, if you didn't know The Shining, if you weren't comparing it to the book, if you'd never read the book and you didn't know anything about it, it's a great movie, but it's not The Shining. Like, it's not that same story. And the miniseries that King did is that story, and it's the story in depth, and it's the story told really well. It's not identical to the book, but it's very close. He made improvements. Totally agree with that. Yep.
Very cool. Now, this is an interesting point. I might be misreading this to how it was originally written. So George has made a point about the time machine, best of both worlds, right? And because there's different versions of the time machine, so they're based on the same story from H.G. Wells, and you got the movie that was made, I think it was in 1960, and of course you got the one made like 15, 20 years ago. If you have the same story or the same source material, and you make two movies that are like decades apart, it doesn't always translate that the more modern version is the better version. And the original one, even if it's, whether it be close to the original story or slightly a bit off kilter, can actually be the better adaptation. So that's almost like a separate discussion, saying the more modern version of a film from a book is not necessarily the better version. So what do you think?
No, I agree. And it's going to be interesting to see what Dune is like as an example of that, because the last movie version of it was brilliant. So it's got a lot to live up to, I think.
It's very funny. I'm going to mention Dune in a second. So Bob, just be aware what Clarke thought about 2001. Remember, Arthur C. Clarke was writing the book while the film was being made. Okay, so even though a lot of people think the book came first and the movie came afterwards, they're actually being done concurrently. So that doesn't match up. So I have something I want to mention here. So I don't read a lot of books. I'll be frankly honest about that. But there is one that I have read, and that, of course, is Dune, which was adapted to the film in 1984. Right. And I don't worry about the great show to watch. I forgot to get rid of that from the presentation. So when it comes to sort of like adapting, whether you like the movie or not, I think a lot of people do. And this is not, and I don't know how it compares to the new version, but I believe there's a lot of similarities. There's a few things that appeared in the film or were changed deliberately from the book, and it actually makes a lot of sense. So to start with, now I have to work on the view that some people know the film relatively well, right? So there's a lot of characters who are missing from Dune, and the most obvious one is Count Fenring. And I actually asked a mate of mine who's actually seen the new version of Dune, did Count Fenring appear in the latest version of the film? And apparently it didn't. So this poor character doesn't appear in any version. But he was a significant character in the book because he was connected to the Emperor. So the fact that he didn't appear in the movie, you don't even notice it. It's like, who knows, who cares? So that is an absence you can understand. So the appearance of the third stage Guild Navigator at the very start of the film, that was actually from the second book. So you didn't even see any Guild Navigators in the first book, but in the film it kind of works because it then sets up who the Spacing Guild are. So in my mind, that kind of works quite well. The weirding way, which in the original movie was based on the weapon, like we saw earlier on, where you got the chew and it blows things up. It wasn't a weapon at all. It was actually a fighting stance for the Fremen. So David Lynch deliberately said, I'm not going to do what they did in the book. I'm going to make it into a weapon. And it actually works better that way, having a weapon that uses like sound for ammunition, if you will. So in my mind, that was actually a very, very good change. Folding space didn't exist in the book. Okay, so in the movie they say you're traveling without moving. This is what the Guild Navigators do. It makes no logical sense when you sit and think about it, but you think, hey, that's pretty damn cool. But of course, in the book, that was completely different because there are no computers. The navigators have to just navigate their way through space, and that's what it's all about. So folding space didn't exist in the books either. There's a lot more information on the Sardaukar in the books that there was in the movie. And of course, for that reason, you don't know why the Sardaukar are so fearless, or a bit of both. Everybody's afraid of them because of their training. So the Fremen rate the Sardaukar as being on the same level as them, and that's just bypassed in the film. In the movie, what happens is they got a gas. There's a green gas inside the mask, and it drives them a bit radio rental, and that's the reason why they fight so well. But so that part was missing from the film, but that's something that was in the book, which was quite good. And of course, Duncan Idaho, he gets killed in the film, but of course, in future books, he comes back as a Gola, which is like a version of a clone, except with metal eyes. So there's an example in that film alone where some aspects change from the book work, and other aspects you're thinking, oh, it's a shame they couldn't put that back in from the book. So I just thought I'd highlight that. So there you go.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yes, very, very cool. Now, where was I going to press some buttons? So, off the top of your head, so in terms of other films that you've seen that came from books, are there any off the top of your head you go, oh, yeah, that was actually a really, really groovy adaptation? That is like absolutely Mickey Mouse, or is there something you go, no, they missed the boat on that one?
You'd think I would have thought about this before the show started, wouldn't you?
That's right. Well, I'll give you some thinking time.
I keep thinking TV shows rather than movies. That's my problem.
Yeah.
I keep going back to Altered Carbon, which anyone who's watched this show probably knows is my favorite book ever. And people keep asking me, what did I think of the show? Because it is quite different from the book. But I loved it. I thought that the decisions they made, they changed the story a bit. They changed a couple of the story arcs for some of the characters. But I think it worked really well. I think presenting it, having to present it in that visual medium, gave them the opportunity to do some stuff that they couldn't, that just didn't come up in the book. I see, now I'm trying to think of books that have been adapted. Minority Report was great. Minority Report, that's one of the things, and that's Philip K. Dick again. A lot of his were actually based on short stories, so there's not a huge amount of detail. And the good thing about that is it makes it easy to fit it into that 2-hour movie medium. A lot of books, because they're so long, they would be better or easier made as a series rather than a movie. And trying to fit everything important into a movie is what gets people upset. Like you're saying with Lord of the Rings, that things get left out just because there is so much in that book, that series of books. And I mean, they made 3 movies. They couldn't tell the story in one movie, so that kind of thing happens a lot. Trying to fit all the detail of a book into a movie. Do you know what? I've already forgotten what the question was. I started ranting.
That's all right. So Evan Williams made a mention about Day of the Triffids. Say the film is quite good, but in no ways represents the book or the BBC adaptation in 81 of Far Superior. I don't know if you ever read the book for Day of the Triffids.
I have, but a long time ago.
Yeah, that's okay. Now,
Ange
has mentioned this a couple of times. I'll put this up. Predestination was very well done. I'm not sure what he's referring to there. Do you know what he means? No, that's okay. We'll move on. So this one from Aaron is interesting. His biggest disappointment in recent years was Ready Player One. Now, Ready Player One, that's an example where the book is written and it's optioned as film rights almost before the thing's published. And that does happen, whereas opposed to saying we pick a book from 50 years ago, sometimes an author can write a book and before it's even been released into the stores, the film makers have said, oh, that's grouse. We've got to buy the rights to that, and away they go. And, of course, Steven Spielberg was heavily involved with Ready Player One. So Aaron has mentioned he was disappointed. I think, would probably be in the minority in that way because a lot of people dialed into the movie massively, mainly because of all the pop culture references, and it was pretty insane. And it's very funny. You're talking about The Shining earlier on. Now, for those who don't know, the whole sequence in Ready Player One where they're dealing with the whole Shining, the Overlook Hotel, it was actually meant to be from Blade Runner. But, of course, Blade Runner 2049 was being made at the time. They couldn't get the rights to Blade Runner, so they had to go to The Shining instead. I'm not sure what other people think about that, but did you ever see Ready Player One at all?
I did. I haven't read the book, so I can't really compare. But I did enjoy the movie. But for me, like as you said, a lot of it was the pop culture references and that kind of stuff. It was a cute, fun movie. It wasn't sort of anything deeper than that for me.
Yeah. That's a very good point, actually. Colin's actually asked a question about you. Favorite TV, and this is probably a bit of a hard one for you because you haven't had a chance to think about it. What's your favorite TV movie or adaptation from a novel?
Well, I mean, The Martian was, in terms of recent stuff, The Martian was brilliant. And that was another one, as you say, I'm pretty sure it was optioned to be made into a movie before it was even published. So that was really good because it was kind of, in a way, it's quite a simple story and, not heaps of characters, not hugely complicated. I thought it worked really well. Are you going to say something?
I am. Actually, I'm just going to cut you off. So, Aaron, you're actually incorrect. Spielberg actually said he deliberately did not put any of his own movie references in there because he did not want it to be a Spielberg-centric film. So things like Jaws and all these other films that he was involved with, he actually made a point of not putting his own stuff in there. Although when you first see it, you go, he may have produced this, that, and whatever else, but the stuff that he directed specifically, that's why there's no ET references or anything like that in Ready Player One. Okay. But yeah, there was a lot that was played into that. Sorry, I'll cut you off. Did you want to keep going?
I can't remember what I was saying now.
That's okay. No problem at all. So there you go. Now, Thomas has said here about the classics are safe as they're good representations. One thing about classic novels is they are really well thought out because at the time when they were written, that was the primary medium. So you got to remember science fiction movies and TV shows, and especially TV shows, because that wasn't until the 60s at least. Science fiction movies didn't exactly have a lot of clout in the big wide world, right? So if you're a novelist writing science fiction, you could pretty much guarantee that you're the focal point. You're the one that everybody was dialing into. If you're a science fiction fan, you read books. And this is back and through the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. So it would make sense that the stories that people are writing back in that era were really, really well thought out, really detailed, really, really good quality, because the films at the time, it took them years to catch up to a point where you go, oh, today, movies, you could argue in some regards, are more superior to some books, especially modern books. So because it was the central focus back then, it does stand to reason that the books written back then would actually be really, really good. As to how well they could adapt to movies, that was a different thing, and some you can and some you can't. But it's sort of interesting to sort of notice that.
I think when you talk about the classics, it's interesting because they're not all good. Like, not all books that were written back then are classics. The classics are classics because they were good. It's not that everything written back then was good. Anyway, carry on.
No, that's okay. No, it's all good. So
What was the
very
comment
gritty.
that
And
you
of course,
popped up?
sorry, I missed that.
I missed the comment that you put up.
Oh, that was just from Christy. Christy was just agreeing with you that with the Martian.
Yeah.
So it was a really good stuff. So there you go. Very, very cool. So one of the things that is interesting is when they make an accidental change to a particular book. So we mentioned this in a show a couple of years ago when they produced A Clockwork Orange. So there's two versions of the book. So what happens when there's multiple versions? So the English version had an extra chapter, the 21st chapter, and the American version had the 21st chapter removed. So if you know the story, Alex Delage gets redeemed in the 21st chapter and he's now a good guy, whereas in the American version, the 21st chapter never happened, so he stays a bad guy. And Stanley Kubrick intentionally went with the American version of the book of the book because he wanted to keep Alex as a bad guy. And so if you're in England, you'd be going, "Hang on, why'd the movie finish here? Where's the last? Where's the last chapter?" That would drive me nuts. What do you reckon?
Yeah. Oh, well, see, that makes me think of there's a situation where the opposite happened. Now, it's not a science fiction movie, but Breakfast at Tiffany's in the book, she stayed a bad girl, and in the movie she had to be redeemed because American audiences, it didn't test well for her to just wander off into the distance and keep being who she was. A lot of it, I mean, audience testing is a thing. And they change the endings based on what the audience thinks. So, it's all about money when that sort of stuff happens. It's all about money. If the audience doesn't like it, they're not going to spend money on it.
Yeah, good point. So obviously we know that June's coming out in a couple of weeks' time, and it's the big thing at the moment. But the other big thing, and we have sort of just covered it very briefly on the show. Now I haven't watched it. I know you were planning to watch it. Is, of course, Foundation, right? So it's the first iteration of Foundation being adapted from page to screen, and that to me is the big cheese of the year, right? To see how that works. Now I know at the time you were watching it. Have you actually seen it yet?
No, I haven't started it yet. No. And interestingly, the chatter about it seems to have died down. When the first few episodes came out, people were talking about it a lot, and it just kind of died down quite quickly. So I don't even really know what people are thinking about it at this point.
Yeah, I'm waiting for someone to tell me when the whole season's out so I can just plow through the whole lot, because I can't stand week to week stuff. It drives me nuts. I actually do want to see one big chunk. And even though I don't remember, I did read the books, but it was a very long time ago. I don't remember them that well. I'm very keen to sort of see how it's adapted and whether it just as something on screen you can go, you know what, that is grouse. Or whether you look at it and go, nah, you've missed the boat, kids. You're right. Start off with such great promise. And it's a big promise to say, okay, we're making Foundation. That is like really serious stuff. And then it just tanks. So I'd like to think that it has the potential to do really, really well. So we'll have to, have an episode of Sci-Fi Zone once we discuss or eventually get to see good old Foundation when it's done and dusted. So the Hunger Games. Now, we haven't mentioned it, but now I never read the books, but I absolutely adore the movies. I thought they were absolutely spectacular, and I really, really love them, but I have no idea how they relate to the books. Do you know about those at all?
I mean, I know about them, obviously, but I haven't read them. It's more young adult stuff, and I tend not to read that. So I haven't read those ones at all. But I did enjoy the movies as well. I thought they were really good.
Yeah, no, very, very cool.
Good casting. Very good casting in that series.
Totally agree with you. Now, this will actually bring us to the topic that I'm going to pass over to you about what films should... what films? I'm going to start that again. What happens when you write things really, really late at night? Hang on. What books? Let's get the... should be made into me. What films? Oh my God, there's a Freudian slip for you, isn't there? Hey, so there you go. All right, let's try that again, shall we? All right. So Claire, so I asked, let's part of the discussion. We're going to look at, okay, what books that currently exist that have never been adapted into movies should be adapted into films. Now, there are obviously going to be some discussions that people have to say, you know what, this should never be made as a movie. Leave it as is. Like, for example, there's never been a film adaptation of Stranger in a Strange Land. Should there be one? Some people probably say no, leave it as a book, right? But you've got a list here that you want to cover off of books that you think should be made into movies. So where are we starting?
Yeah, I reckon we start with Robopocalypse. This is from, I think, about 2011 it was written, and it it's been optioned, it's been planned to be made into a movie, and hasn't happened yet for various reasons. But I reckon this will make a really good movie. It has a bit of a Terminator vibe in that the robots are out to get us. It's very much a war between the humans and the robots, but there's no time travel, so there's kind of more of an equal footing. And the way the book is presented is it's actually a series of memories, stories, and articles, and those sorts of things of different little pieces of things that happened in the war. So a lot of it is quite personal. It's about one particular person's experience of this little part of what happened. And there is a sequel, which I think would be really interesting. I don't want to give away the ending, but I think that would make a great movie. I think, I mean, you saw from the front of the book, it's all kind of shiny, sparkly robots. But in the story, it's not like the Terminator. They're not super robots. They're robots. And some of them work well and some of them don't, and they have to work with what they've got. They have to adapt to be able to fight, and we have to adapt as well to be able to fight them. I think it would make a really good. It was a great book. I sort of picked it up almost by accident. One of those books that you kind of wandering around looking for something to read, and Robo-Apocalypse kind of sounds like an interesting name. So I picked it up and wasn't expecting much, to be honest, but really enjoyed it. Found it really good. So, yeah, I'd like to see that made into a movie. I'd like to see what that looks like on screen.
So you can say he's part machine, part man, part Robo-Apocalypse, all book. I love it. Very, very cool. Christy has mentioned the Bulgarian, I think that's how you pronounce it, or the...
Yeah.
Do you know what that is? I think that's one story.
Bulgarian, yes.
Oh, yeah, Bulgarian, yeah.
Well, it's fantasy rather than science fiction, but it's a great series. There were 5 books in the original Bulgarian, and then 5 more following it up. I haven't read the Millennium that Christy mentioned as well, but the Bulgarian would be great to see. It has lots of those little personal moments, but it's also a big sweeping story. It's a save the world kind of story, and I love the magic in that. I love the way it worked, and the sense of family that they built and that kind of stuff. And again, for me, it's about the characters, and some of the characters in that were just great. That'd be a good one to see. That'd be a good one.
Very good. Thomas has mentioned about the Hunger Games. He read them, and the movie changes the end. That happens a fair bit, as we discussed earlier, where the ending of a book will be different to the film version. Yep. Sometimes, as Claire mentioned, it's just purely for the audience's benefit, and they go, yep, it sells more tickets, and away they go. Colin has mentioned about watching Foundation. He can't get into it. I can imagine Foundation is not going to be your typical Marvel Cinematic Universe, blow up everything. It's all laser beams. I reckon it's going to be very cerebral, much like our Journeys. So, probably not going to be everybody's cup of tea because of the nature of the story. So there you go. And Angie's mentioned about the Long Earth could be a great series as well. We're still going with Claire's
that would be good, actually.
Yeah, and here's the next one.
Yeah, so the Wind-Up Girl's an interesting one. One of the things I'd like to see about this is the visuals, like to see how they would imagine it. It's set in Thailand in the 2300s, I think. So it's in the future. Climate change is a thing, and half the world is drowned. Bangkok would be underwater if it weren't for all the levees and dams and stuff keeping the water at bay. And the sort of base story underneath it is that most of the world has gone fully genetically modified. So all the food and everything is genetically modified. There's hardly anything left of the original nature. But Thailand is the exception. They have a seed bank that holds sort of the original genetics of lots and lots of plant life. And people are trying to get hold of it. And the energy usage has changed quite a lot. Power's gone and all that. Power's hard to manage and all that kind of stuff. And so they're developing, I don't really understand the technology behind it, but they're developing sort of springs that are built in such a way that they hold energy. Hence the description wind-up girl, and she's genetically modified to be stronger and faster and all those sorts of things, and is of course kind of a slave basically, because that's how these sorts of stories generally go. So it's a combination of lots of climate change themes and that kind of stuff, but genetically modified humans, and also the theme of her being different from everyone else. And then she hears about a place where people like her live. So she decides she needs to try and escape and find this place. Really interesting story. Really, again, the characters are really interesting. But it's the world that they portray that I find that I would really love to see on screen. It's Thailand, so it's it's hot and it's humid and it's all those sorts of things. And how they have they're still ruled by a queen, and there are all those sorts of things going on. 300 years in the future, when the rest of the world has changed and they're trying to hold on to who they are, kind of thing. I think that would be a really interesting one. This was a great book and it won lots of awards. It was his first novel. Won Hugo Best Novel that year, and a few other, like 4 or 5 other awards at the same time. And just beautifully written, very descriptive, very very visual in the way it's written. So I think it would translate really well to the screen.
Yeah, be bought by Hollywood, and they'll move it from Thailand over to sort of like somewhere in America, and it's like, that's not meant to be there. But how often does that happen in these things? Now, this one is not talking about drug dealing in Frankston. Just sort of clarify that.
Pushing on. Yeah, no, it's not at all. This is a big story about, and this is aliens. Basically, an extra moon turns up in the solar system, and the nearest spaceship to it is this ship that's out there basically kind of harvesting ice. And so they get sent to go and find out what this moon is all about. And it turns out to be a ship, and they're only supposed to go as far as they can before they can safely turn back. But they get sucked into its I want to say gravity, but that's not quite what it is. They get sucked into, and they get to a point where they can't turn back. So they have to choose: do they try and get back and probably all die, or do they settle on this moon that isn't a moon, that's really a spaceship, and live their lives there, staying on it, following it to see where it goes and what happens. It's a big story. It's almost generational, but not quite. And 2 different kinds of aliens, each trying to be the ones, each trying to, the first ones they meet say that the other ones are the bad guys, and the other ones, of course, are saying that the first ones they meet are the bad guys. And there's all sorts of trade going on, and who gets what, and how can we work together. And it was a great book. I think it would be difficult to make into a movie, but I think it would be amazing to see.
I mean, clearly these people who in this story are a bit of budget knobs, because when this moon turns up, that's no moon, that's a space station. That's a basically obvious thing, that one. You've got to get some Star Wars in there somewhere. Good old Floyd, our number 1 American fan, he loves it when you're on a tangent and passionately translate your thoughts. Absolutely awesome. So there you go. And it's all about that smile. Oh, yeah. You could clearly tell he's talking about you, not me. So there you go. And there we go. And even Claire's on your side. Gavin's on your side. Claire's a great perspective and translate what she has said really well. Now, for those people out there who are dealing with vision problems, this one is going to go, you'll make your mind explode. So just giving you some heads up, because it is very, very trippy. Once again, it's like pushing ice in Frankston. It is this. Look at that. How's that for a cover?
Yeah, they're interesting covers, these books. It's a series. Equations of Life is the first one. This is relatively near future. From memory, I think it's 100 or so years in the future. And the main character is Russian. He has survived a nuclear meltdown in Russia and has moved to London, which is the last city left in the UK. and it's kind of divided into zones, and there's lots of fighting and factions and all sorts of stuff going on. And this guy is just trying to survive. He doesn't want to get involved in anything because getting involved in anything is risky, and all he wants to do is just live and survive. And then he kind of accidentally rescues a girl who happens to be the daughter of one of the biggest bad guys in the city. So he kind of has no choice but to get involved. It's kind of cyberpunk, kind of not. It's a little bit of post-apocalyptic. It's a little bit bits of everything, and funny and clever. It has one of the main characters is a nun who uses a machine gun to protect her church. And it's just, again, lots of great characters, really interesting story, well told. Different perspective, very different perspective from what I'm used to as well.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of a Jackie Chan
Come
movie.
on, I can see you want to say something, Dax.
And he just gets caught up in all the stuff that goes on around him. He's completely sort of like, he's not even meant to be there. And the Nuns with Guns thing is actually based on an action figure series like this high. Siste Ave Marie with an AK-47 and all those Nuns with Guns. There's a classic series of little lead figures, and Sister Mary Margaret with a rocket launcher. It's just grouse. Very, very cool. I am totally dialed into what you're saying, by the way. I'm not making fun of you, so I thought I'd just clarify that. And there we go. None, none with a gun. Sounds fun. Absolutely love it. All right, and the lucky last one of your group, we were talking about The Martian earlier, and ironically, this fits in quite nicely.
Artemis, yeah. So by the same guy who wrote Andy Weir. This is probably closer to young adult fiction. The protagonist in it is a younger woman. And it's set, there's a base on the moon, basically, and it's stuff that happens there. Again, I think this is a lot of fun. The main character, whose name I can't even remember, isn't that terrible? Gets into trouble and has to try and sort things out, and is not dealing with just the usual kind of things that you're dealing with, but also dealing with having to, live on the moon. You can't go outside without a spaceship. Everyone knows where everyone is all the time. You can't get away from your family because you're living on a enclosed space on the moon, all that kind of stuff. But there's tourism, and there are other people coming in, all those sorts of things. It's a fun read. Andy Weir is a really good writer, very engaging, really easy to read. I know people complain about the science in The Martian, and I'm sure people will complain about the science in Project Hail Mary as well. This has a lot less of that, so people might like it better. But I think it would be a fun movie. I think it would be a good one to watch. I'd love to see that. Yeah. So those are the top picks at the moment.
Very good. You have to wait and see if they ever become a reality. Ange, and we're going to finish in a sec. Ange has made mention about they've done The Boys. They should do Steelheart. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't.
No? Okay, no worries. And even Gavin said he couldn't even explain Golden Book like you do. So there you go. So how's that for high praise? You two could explain. I'd love to hear you explain a Golden Book.
I waffle.
Love it. And the other thing with Nuns with Guns, I agree with Aaron. It's a director's cut of The Sound of Music, so absolutely fantastic. So there you go. Oh, Jesus. Hills were alive with the sound of Uzi, so good on you, Colin. So, very, very good. But the funny thing is what a lot of people, and we're just going to wrap up in a sec, the funny thing is a lot of sci-fi movies have been adapted from books, and a lot of people don't even realize it. And, of course, the other type of book that they also get adapted, graphic novels as well, and there's been two main ones for that, Watchmen, and it's actually 4 at least, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, which I absolutely adored as a film, X-Men, of course, and even Oblivion, believe it or not, came from an unpublished graphic novel, but we'll save that for another day. And what we might save for another day is actually discussion about novelizations. Oh, how good is that? Fantastic.
That's
what do you reckon, Claire? We're all very, very groovy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much more we could talk about. I mean, I haven't even mentioned Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, we can now. I'll get you to slip it in. Paul Floyd's. It's 4 in the morning at Floyd's part of the world, and he's willing to stay for a few extra minutes while you have a chat. So by all means, get into it, because I know you're right. There was some significant changes to the film from the books, but go for it.
And that's the thing. It's not just the film and the books. I mean, it started as a radio show, and then it was rewritten by the same author for the record version, the LP version, and then there were books, and then there was more LPs, and then there were more books, and then there was a BBC series which was really quite good, based on the books, and then there was a movie which was completely rewritten again. So there were lots of elements of it, but a whole different story, and again, based on the writing of the same author. So that was a completely different. The same guy kept rewriting the story over and over again for every different medium, and they all work. They all work in different ways. I started out with the books, and then and I've got the radio series on CD, and I've got the LPs on vinyl, and I've got the movie on DVD. So I've got the whole range of them, and enjoy all the different ones in different ways. So that's a different thing again.
Yeah, I love it, because it'd be one of those scenarios if you said, "Oh, this version of
it.
Hitchhikers is shit. This version is fantastic." Yet they're written by the same dude. So there you go. How good is that? We've actually got Lewis joining us from England, which is kind of bad timing, because we're supposed to be finishing up in a couple of seconds. In fact, we're already like 1 minute overtime. So there you go. And ironically, we've now got 16 people watching. We've got more people watching us now than we started with originally. So how good is that? And yes, even Thomas said he loves good old Hitchhikers, which is a really look. It's a kind of show. It's pretty hard to dislike.
Yeah.
So there's no denying that. And I agree with Claire. There's a lot more we could sort of cover off, but we don't want to wear out our welcome for this evening. So sorry, poor old Lewis from the UK. You've joined us, but we're about to buzz off. So there you go. Watch the replay. It's well worth it. What can I say? So very, very cool. Any final words that you want to say before we leave for tonight, Claire?
No, I mean, Floyd made a comment earlier about just wanting to be entertained, whether you're reading the book or watching the movie. Take it for what it is and enjoy it. I think that's good advice. You might have to go way back to find that comment.
Yeah, that's okay. I was going to put on the screen and I sort of missed it. It must be one of your moments of like going off on tangents, which apparently everybody loves. So how good is that?
Yeah, it probably was. It probably was.
Very, very, very good stuff. All right, so whether you like just watching movies written directly for the screen or watching movies that are adapted from books, there's a whole lot out there. It's all absolutely fantastic. We've got to love it. And the most important thing is, so long as you watch those movies when you're in the zone. So there you go. We'll leave you to it, and we'll see you all next week. Only 4 shows to go before the end of the year. So there you go. All right, we'll leave you to it, and take care for now. Okay, bye.
Bye.